What's up, guys? Eli here. Today I'm going to do an Alice in Chains discography ranking video. I've been meaning to do this for years, at least 3-4 years or something like that. Alice in Chains are a band that's very, I guess you could say, near and dear to my heart. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. They're one of the bands that I go to when I want to hear something that's not only heavy but emotional, well-written lyrics. The lyrics of Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell were very personal. I felt like those guys were very much kind of bearing their souls, or so to speak, and I always appreciated that about them. So Alice in Chains, if you're not too familiar with who they are, I don't see how that could even be possible, but they formed in the Seattle, Washington area around 1988. They are to this day still going strong despite some pretty substantial setbacks, losing band members to drug overdoses. There have been times where they've had some pretty large breaks, gaps in the discography, but needless to say, they are still going fairly strong to this day. So I'm going to make this video a little bit unique, which is something I like to do when I do discography rankings. I like to throw in, depending on the band, I should say, I like to throw in non-full-length releases, especially if I think they're important. Now, I did consider putting the Live Unplugged album in this ranking because I almost feel like, even though those are all songs that are on various albums, I almost feel like that is, in its own way, kind of a standalone release. I mean, anyone that's heard it knows what I'm talking about. Sure, they were acoustic songs. Sure, they were live, but they were kind of like reworkings of Alice in Chains songs, and they almost, in some ways, some of the songs kind of took on a new life. And I think that is one of the best live albums of all time, if I'm being honest. So what I did here is, so I didn't include that despite wanting to. I did include the Mad Season album, the Soul Mad Season album, even though that was only one member from Alice in Chains, which was Lane Staley. I included that anyways because this is, one of the only rankings it would ever fit in, being it was a short-lived project. And I also included the 3 Jerry Cantrell solo albums. So there are 12 albums here, and it should be challenging but fun. I tried not to put too much thought into where my ranking, where I would rank all these albums. I tried not to overthink it because I know the more I second guess myself and the more I thought about it, I would just keep switching things around. So I just kind of tried to do it quickly, went with my gut completely, and this is what I came up with. Alright, starting at the bottom with number 12, we got from 2021 Brighten by Jerry Cantrell. I just found out that this cover is glow in the dark, by the way. Now that I say that, that's my favorite part about this entire album. I'm sorry, Jerry, but this album just does not do it for me. I like his first 2 solo albums. I like him quite a bit, especially the second one, and this one just does not have almost any of those qualities that I'm looking for. There is a couple of moments on this album where he kind of reaches into the more depressive Alice in Chains sound, even solo, like even some stuff that might almost fit on the second album or the first. There's moments of that, but they're brief. They're extremely brief. I tried, I listened to this probably 3 or 4 times, and I'm not done with it. I'm giving it a nice good rest. Maybe in a year or 2 I'll break it back out and I might like it a little more, but as of now, man, this album was a huge disappointment for me. Last year this was one of my most anticipated albums, and it could not have let me down more. So, number 12, Brighten from Jerry Cantrell. Number 11, I have The Devil Put Dinosaurs Here by Alice in Chains from 2013. So this album is not bad by any means. I should say that last Jerry Cantrell album that I named is the only album in this entire list that I don't pretty much love or like quite a bit. So this, this being pretty low in the ranking, I still do like it. This is a heavy album. This is, I think, out of the comeback era Alice in Chains stuff, I think this this probably has some of the more heavy moments, but it also is almost too consistent. This doesn't really have the peaks and valleys that some of the other comeback material has. This one is more just straight across good. It doesn't have the real great moments. It doesn't have the lower lows. It's just like I said. It's too consistent. It's definitely worth listening to. It's definitely worth owning, especially if you're a completist like me. Even if you're not a completist, I think it's still worth owning. I do look forward to listening to this more in the near future. Like, I'm not going to shelve it and give up on it. I've probably listened to it 5 or 6 times since it came out, and it just, there's very little on here that I can remember. Like right now, if I were to try to talk about specific songs, I couldn't do it, and that's not a good sign. But that's also not unusual for me. I could be missing some things here. I'm sure there's some of you guys that have a lot more to say about it. I'm sure some of you guys absolutely love it, but it's just, for me, it just didn't stick in my noggin. Number 10, we have Raineir Fog from 2018. This is the most recent Alice in Chains album. It is the what I call the post comeback era, which is the William Duvall on vocals version of Alice in Chains since Lane Staley is dead. I like this album quite a bit. It was a grower for me, I will say. When it first came out, it was like the devil put dinosaurs here. It just kind of went in one ear and out the other. But I noticed after giving it a break, the first listen, I felt disappointed. I shelved it for probably a year or two, returned to it, and instantly I like it quite a bit. Red Giant, Drone, the title track, Raineir Fog, the opening track, the one is a heavy song. This is good. This is really good. This is a step more in the right direction, because like I said, I did feel a little bit let down from the devil put dinosaurs here. Now, this was a step in the right direction. However, 3 years later, I think Alice in Chains have been kind of maybe a little bit dormant in the last 3 years. 3 years later, Jerry would put out that solo album that I really didn't like. So I'm kind of a little bit worried on what the next Alice in Chains album, should there be one. I'm kind of worried about the quality of material that's going to be on it. But I don't doubt Jerry Cantrell. I think he's a master songwriter. I think as long as he is alive, I think he will have something to say musically. Number 9, we're going to go with Jerry Cantrell, Boggy Depot from 1998, first Jerry Cantrell solo album. I'm sorry I don't have the album to show you right now. I couldn't find the first 2 Jerry Cantrell albums. I couldn't find them. They're in boxes somewhere, and I just couldn't find them. But they'll appear on the channel once they show up, in a couple of months or whatever. So Boggy Depot, I liked it quite a bit when it came out. This was, 98, Alice in Chains were inactive. Lane was still alive, but, I'm pretty sure the AIC were broken up in 98. I don't remember exactly, but I like this album quite a bit. It is not super heavy. I think it's less heavy than most Alice in Chains music. It has some softer moments that I think are really good, that are similar to some of the softer moments on Alice in Chains albums, and I really appreciated that, especially like I think it's the last song on the album I really like. Sorry, my headphones died. I'm gonna just kind of have to do it without them for the rest of this video. But anyways, Bogey Depot, I like it quite a bit. It's an album that sometimes I'll listen to it and I'll love it, and then sometimes I'll listen to it and it won't do a whole lot for me. So I guess I have to be in the right mood. But I do think the songwriting on there is pretty quality. Number 8, Alice in Chains, Black Gives Way to Blue from 2009. Now, this was the Alice in Chains comeback album. Lane had died in the early 2000s. I didn't think that they would ever come back, but Jerry did bring back the band. He had a new singer named William Duvall, who's awesome. He fits quite well. And I will admit, this album, upon release, I liked it, but the more I listened to it, I actually started to like it less, and I'm not really sure why, because I shelved it like I tend to do. I shelved it for a couple years, and for some odd reason, I pulled it back out and started playing it, and I started to realize that I love this album. For me, this is by far the best comeback Alice in Chains album. It's better than I don't know if, obviously I can't really say it's better than too much of the early Alice in Chains stuff, because I have it at number 8, but I want to put it higher. But that's just, for me, that's how strong the early Alice in Chains stuff is. So for this being at a number 8, it's almost to the midpoint. That's saying a lot. Just, if you haven't heard this, definitely give it a shot. I feel like a lot of Alice in Chains fans really like this one, but a lot of them also kind of shrugged it off. A lot of them were like, no Lane, no Alice in Chains, and I totally get that. His death was a huge fucking loss to this band, but we have to remember, this is Jerry Cantrell's brainchild. That he started this band. He writes the majority of the music, the majority of the lyrics. He's always contributed at least 20 or 30% of the vocals, sometimes up to 50 or more percent. But anyways, if this album's been a tough sell, and you don't maybe want to dedicate time to listening to the whole album, check these tracks out. Definitely check out the last track, the title track, Black Gives Way to Blue. Beautiful song. That is the most reminiscent of early Alice in Chains that has appeared on any of these later albums. It is amazing. I also recommend checking out When the Sun Rose Again. That song it's sad and depressing, but it's really, really fucking good. Those are my 2 favorites. There are other good songs on this album. Maybe Check My Brain. It's a really good album. Those 2 songs I named are, they make the album worth listening to just on the strength of those 2. So, yeah, I really, really dig this album. Number 8, Black Gives Way to Blue. Number 7, I have Jerry Cantrell, Degradation Trip from 2002. This was the second Jerry Cantrell solo album. I like it a lot. Obviously, I have it at number 7. It doesn't beat for me any of the early Alice in Chains stuff, but honestly, it comes close. I liked the album a lot upon release. I instantly liked it, and honestly, it grew with me over time. I liked it more and more and more. I will admit, the first like 3 or 4 songs are by far my favorite. I feel like it's a little bit front loaded. Those songs are masterful. They're heavy. They're incredibly sad and depressing. They're somber. I like some of the songs near the end of the album too. There's a few in the middle that are kind of fillerish to me. But if you haven't heard the album, listen to at least the first 3 or 4 songs. If those don't blow you away, I guess this just isn't for you. Lineup wise, you had Mike Borden on drums from Faith No More, and his drum sound on this album is one of my favorite drum sounds on any album. It's just so crisp and heavy, and I mean, his playing is good. He's a very precise drummer. He's not a drummer that I guess you could say he's kind of like Sean Kinney from Alice in Chains, where he doesn't do things that he doesn't need to do. He doesn't play just to be flashy. He plays super tasteful, and he plays to benefit the song. But yeah, his drum sound on this album, I don't know what it is, and I'm not a big production nerd, but his drum sound, it's great. On bass, you had, I think it's Robert Trujillo, right, from Metallica, currently Metallica. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure it's Robert, but yeah. Anyways, my favorite Cantrell solo album, number 7, Degradation Trip. Number 6, we have Alice in Chains-Sap. This is the second EP they ever did. This is an earlier release. This is from '92. So this was released the same year as Dirt, so just before Dirt. And in that matter, it pales in comparison. Dirt was such a monumental album. This is a good EP. It's got, if I were to pick one song, I would pick "Got Me Wrong." "Got Me Wrong" is probably one of my favorite Alice in Chains songs. So this is kind of mellow, I guess you could say, kind of along the lines of, like, how like Jar of Flies was the more mellow side of Alice in Chains. For me, Sap is it's maybe a little heavier than Jar of Flies, but it's It's that more mellow sound that I actually really dig from Alice in Chains. I actually like the more somber songs. I like those more than the rocking, heavier songs. So it's a good EP, but for the early stuff, it ranks low for me. Number 5, we have Alice in Chains with Alice in Chains' self-titled album from '95. So this was a follow-up to Jar of Flies. This album was a grower for me in a lot of ways. Didn't I when I first got it, I sort of liked it. This album, just whenever I listen to it, I picture the color gray because it's so drab. This album is depressing. It is just despondent, somber, but I love it for those reasons. There are some heavy songs like Grind and Sludge Factory, but then it's got songs like Heaven Beside You. But emotionally and lyrically, this is so heavy. This is so emotionally heavy. Lane Staley was not doing good at this point, not doing good at all. In fact, Jerry does more vocals on this album than he ever did on the earlier stuff because Lane just wasn't there enough. For that reason, I think I like Jerry's vocals just fine. I like them a lot, but I think if Lane had more of a vocal presence on this album, it might rank higher for me. But I will also say, though I didn't really love this album when I first got it, now I think it's because I've heard all the others so much. I've just listened to them just entirely too much. And since I listened to this one less, this is actually kind of like my current favorite. It's not an all-time favorite, but it is. This has become a very go-to Alice in Chains album for me since I'm not really burnt out on it like I am on some of their other stuff. 5 or 10 years ago, this would have ranked much lower, but I'm totally comfortable now with putting it at number 5. Number 4, we have the Soul album from Mad Season from 1995 as well. Same year as, that Alice in Chains album, which was kind of strange because, Lane, obviously, like I said, he didn't have a whole lot to do. Like, he just kind of wasn't there for a lot of the songwriting process. I guess the reason would be, he was pretty busy doing stuff with Mad Season. Although his health was starting to, deteriorate quite a bit. And I know that Jerry Cantrell was not real happy with Lane starting a second band. Lane just kind of just threw it on him. He was like, "Hey, dude, I'm doing this." Yeah, Jerry was pissed, and I kind of understand. I mean, Alice in Chains has always been Jerry's baby, and he wanted Lane in the band, so he took it kind of personal. He didn't want Lane writing great songs for another band when he could be writing those great songs for Alice in Chains. So I kind of see both sides. I see Lane's wanting to have another creative output, but I also see Jerry's point because bands are kind of like relationships. Sometimes you want your partner to to be with you all the time and not with other people. I guess I don't know. That's not like any relationship I've ever had, but I don't know. I compare. I'm not a musician, but I've always kind of compared bands to relationships because I think they totally are. So, anyways, Mad Season. I liked this album quite a bit when I first got it, probably in the early 2000s. I liked it a lot, but I only really liked like 2 or 3 songs on here. The song "Wake Up," the debut track, the first track, is amazing. Probably one of my favorite rock songs of all time. It's so atmospheric. It's so somber and depressing, but still with a bit of, it's depressing and somber, but there's an undercurrent of hope in there that is a nice dichotomy. I like almost all the songs on here quite a bit, except for the bluesy one that's like a Zeppelin song. I think it's Artificial Red. Don't really care for that, but the rest of this album is just so strong. The songwriting here is just so inspired. It's masterful. I love this album way more now than I ever did. So, number 4, Mad Season. Number 3, we got the debut Facelift from 1990. So 20 years ago or so, I would have rated this a lot higher, and you could argue that it deserves to be higher than a number 3. But for me, at this point in my life, sure, it's an amazing album. It's an amazing debut. There are songs on here that are some of the best songs they've ever done, but there is some filler on here, and that's what kind of hinders it from ranking higher. But it does have some classics that they probably continue to this day to play in their live set. We got "We Die Young," "Man in the Box," "Sea of Sorrow," "Bleed the Freak." I can't remember. Then it's got so it's a front loaded album actually. I think the second side completely pales in comparison to the first side. What do you guys think? Are you a big fan of the last half of this album? Because I sure am not. The first half is just completely A tier, top shelf songwriting, and then the second half for me it just kind of falls apart. So it's a very flawed album, but it's still for what it is, it's amazing, and it's their debut. I mean, you can't expect a young band to be perfect, on their first album. So, number 3, the debut, Facelift. Now, my top 2, I really struggled. I'll admit, I really, really struggled, but I had to make a decision, and I don't know. A couple years ago, I might have reversed these two, but for now, I'm comfortable with listing my number 2 as Alice in Chains, Dirt, their second album, and by far my favorite full length from the band. I mean, this album this was a game changer when it came out. This thing is so heavy. I never really considered them a metal band, even though Jerry Cantrell, he is. I have read in interviews, he said Alice in Chains have always been a heavy metal band to him. I get that. For me, they're a heavy rock band, but I mean we're grasping at straws here. They pretty much all the problems that I had with Facelift, they corrected on this album. There is little to no filler. I mean, almost this entire album is mostly classics and songs that again they probably still play live. We got "Them Bones," "Damn That River," "Rain When I Die," "Down in a Hole." "Down in the Hole" is probably my favorite AIC song ever. "Sick Man," "Rooster," "Junkhead," "Dirt," "Godsmack," "Hate to Feel," "Angry Chair," and "Wood." Now, yeah, I'm struggling to pick songs on here that I might consider filler. So I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna say there is no filler. This is one of the most emotional albums I think I've ever heard. Especially with knowing what Lane was going through and his passing. When I listen to this album now, I feel a lot of things. I feel like I'm kind of, in a way, I'm seeing the world through Lane's eyes, just a little bit. I've never had like a crazy drug addiction like he struggled with. I've certainly never gone through anything like that, but I have struggled with other things. So I know what it's like to struggle in other ways, and I can definitely sympathize. Yeah, this album is at least a 9 out of 10 for me. If not, it's probably a 10 out of 10. It's an all-time classic and one of my favorite albums of all time. So, number 2, Dirt. So I'm sure now you figured out what my number 1 is. You might think it's weird that it's an EP. Is that unfair? Maybe a little bit, but I was not going to make a list or a ranking of any sort for this band without including Jar of Flies, which is my number 1. Now, like I said, my number 1 over the years has kind of flip-flopped. Sometimes it's Jar of Flies, sometimes it's Dirt. At this point in my life, the 40-year-old Eli is, sure, it's a short EP. It's only it's 7 songs. It's not really that short. This is as long as some full-length albums, so I mean, it's not that short. To me, this is a 10 out of 10 recording here. Like I said earlier, I really like that somber, kind of softer, version of Alice in Chains, and that is all over this. That is what this EP represents. Rotten Apple, Nutshell, I Stay Away. It's got No Excuses, and then it's got a song called Whale and Wasp, which is like this melancholy instrumental. It's it's sad, but it also has like, you know, it's not depressing just to depress you. It's sad, but it also is uplifting kind of at the same time. It's a cool instrumental. A lot of instrumentals on a lot of albums I consider filler, and to me that's not filler. To me that suits the album or suits the EP. I think they could have maybe put another one of those in there somewhere between these songs, but then it would have been a longer, it would have been like a full length album had they done that. Don't Follow, Love Don't Follow, Swing on This. Yeah, I cannot say enough good things about this. And at this point in my life, I don't think this will ever not be my number one. I to this day, I don't get tired of this. Every time I put it on, I have to play it a couple of times, and then I have to play it the next day, and then the next day. I'm currently kind of giving it a break because over the last couple of years, I did listen to this a lot. Fuck knows we needed shit like this over the last few years, and yeah, I didn't want to burn myself out entirely, but these songs for me are just, they're so close to my heart that I will never really get tired of them. So I might not listen to this for the next couple years, but you can be assured I will reach for it again, and when I do, it's still going to be my number one. So. Anyways, guys, what do you think? What are your favorite Alice in Chains albums? What are your least favorite? If you want, just go ahead and tell me your entire ranking. Do you think it's cool that I included Mad Season in the Jerry Cantrell albums, or do you think that was kind of lame? I think it's cool. I could have done a Jerry Cantrell, solo album ranking, but he's only got 3, and I don't know, it would have been a really short video. So I think it's cool to include them in this list, especially because, he, Alice in Chains was his baby anyway. It almost, Alice in Chains almost could be, he could do Alice in Chains by himself and just have like session guys, kind of like what Billy Corgan does with Smashing Pumpkins these days. So he's such an important part of the band that I felt totally comfortable including those. Maybe the Mad Season was a little weird, but again, since they only had one album, I liked including it in here because it can't go in any other ranking video. And I think it deserves to be talked about more. So anyways, that's all I got for now, guys. Let's talk AIC, and I hope you guys are having a good night. We'll talk soon. Cheers.